Hey guys, welcome back to Econ Time with SK. So grab your notebooks, your favorite cup of coffee, and let's get started. So in this video, we're going to continue our discussion about who pays a greater burden of tax when demand is more inelastic compared to the supply. Okay, so now we're actually going to focus on two extreme cases. Okay, one extreme case is that demand is so inelastic that it just becomes a vertical line, right? So basically, we're dealing with perfectly inelastic demand. So the old equilibrium is where the original supply curve intersects with the demand curve. Let's call it D1, right? So that is going to be E1. Now, I've told you that this vertical distance between the to supply curve is your per unit tax. Okay, and as it's shown here, the new equilibrium occurs at E2. So the old price was P1 and the new price is P2. So what have we learned? Consumer burden is always new price after tax minus old price before tax paid by consumers times the total quantity that is being bought and sold now. So here, if we were to shade this region, it would be this vertical distance, P2 minus P1, times this quantity, right? I'm going to just call it Q2 because I've written it in the formula here. So it's going to be this shaded region. This is going to be the consumer burden. Notice something interesting. Where's the producer burden? So usually, how do we calculate producer burden? Producer burden is P1, the original equilibrium price, minus after tax, what is the take home for the producer, times whatever is the equilibrium quantity. Can you see a P naught here in the diagram? Well, because the demand curve is perfectly inelastic now, actually the take home price for the producer is also at P1, right? So basically I'm saying P1 and P naught is the same. If that is the case, this actually just goes to zero, which means this whole thing now is zero. So what I'm saying is that the producer burden is zero. And the idea here is that people are so attached to the good that producers know they can pass on the whole of the tax burden to the consumer without losing any customers, because this is perfectly inelastic demand, and even when price increases, the consumers hold on and continue consuming the good. So for very inelastic demand, the extreme case where the demand curve is perfectly inelastic, we've got a situation where the full tax burden is being paid by the consumer. So like before, when demand is more inelastic than supply, the consumer burden is still greater than the producer burden. It's just that it's a unique case where the producer burden is zero. Okay, so let's look at the next case, another extreme scenario. We're still dealing with the situation where demand is actually more inelastic than the supply. But now we're looking at a situation where the demand retains its inelasticity, so it's quite steep. But the supply curve now becomes extreme, it becomes completely flat, meaning it is perfectly elastic. So now we're dealing with another extreme case where we're dealing with a perfectly elastic supply curve. In this scenario, what happens? Who pays a greater share of the tax? Like before, this vertical distance between the two supply curves tells you what is the per unit tax, tells you about the amount of the tax. So now the old equilibrium is at where S1 and D1 intersect, so it is at E1 here. And the new equilibrium is at E2, which is right here, which is where the new supply curve and the demand curve intersect. Again, we'll do like we did before. You're going to take the new equilibrium, draw a vertical line until you hit the old supply curve, and then draw a horizontal line to the price axis. Let me change the pen color so it's easy for you to see. So from E2, You're going to draw a vertical line until you hit the old supply curve. Then you draw a horizontal line that goes and hits your price axis. Okay. So remember that E1, which was our original equilibrium, this is E1, the price was P1, right? And now at E2, consumers are faced by a new price, which is P2. Okay. So what are you seeing about the consumer burden? Consumer burden, remember, like before, consumer burden is going to be the new price that you pay after tax minus the old price that you paid before tax times, in this case, the quantity being sold, so that is Q2. So if I were to shade it, this whole region is the consumer burden. What's the producer burden of tax here? Producer burden, remember, is basically the old price that they were paying minus the new take-home price. Well, guess what? In this case, P1 is the same as P0, right? So usually producer burden is P1 minus P0 times Q2. Well, I've just said they're equal, which means that this part just goes to 0, which means the producer burden essentially is 0. And so, in this diagram, that is why we can't find it. So what we're seeing is that in this extreme case here, consumer burden, because demand is inelastic compared to supply, consumer burden is more than producer burden still, but now the producer burden is just 0. All right. With this, we end our discussion where we explored what would happen when demand is more inelastic compared to the supply. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video where we discuss what happens when demand is more elastic compared to the supply. All right, guys, I shall see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.